Good morning, or shall I say good morning to everyone. Lovely to see you on this bright and crisp Friday morning, Erev Shabbos. Looking forward to another wonderful Shabbos. We're overflowing, the shul's open, the hall's open, the two services are running in parallel with youth services. We're getting back to where we should be, building a greater Woodside Park. Love you to be a part of it. If you're able to come along in future weeks, we would be honored and delighted to welcome you with open doors and open hearts. So let me share with you, I apologize, the Yortzeit sheets have gone missing, so we will dedicate the learning this morning, Le'ilai Nishmas, to all those that have Yortzeit or would be saying Kaddish for their loved ones. We wish them all long life. I want to share with you the title that I put on the program for today is Rabbi Akiva, Life's Greatest Lesson. And I want to share with you a very deep idea, which I think, despite it being a Friday morning, I think we can handle it just about. So firstly, let me say good morning to my dear friends that are here joining us in the metropolis and across the world, to David, to Peter, to Rachel, to David, to Woodside Park, whoever that is, to Woodside Park again, and to Alan and to Estelle. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we mentioned already, we're studying about the period of the Omer. As you'll see, many people are looking rather unkempt as we are in a period of national mourning for the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva that tragically died in a mysterious plague during this period between Pesach and Shavuot. And we know from the Talmud that the reason for the fact that they died was Shelo Nahogu Kavod Zelazem. We've spoken about that in previous days, the fact that they didn't give the requisite respect, honor, dignity, to respect each other for who they were, not for what they weren't, to respect the opinions and the positions that each one took up. That we have discussed. But what we haven't discussed is something far more personal that I want to address and discuss with you today. And that is Rabbi Akiva himself. You know, Rabbi Akiva is one of the most enigmatic characters, personalities in the Talmud. If ever there was someone that we can all relate to, it's Rabbi Akiva. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu, Avraham Avinu, all of them, they're giants. It's very hard for us to be able to relate to them. Rabbi Akiva came from nothing. We all know Rabbi Akiva's story. He was a shepherd. And till the age of 40, he could not read. Listen, friends, he could not distinguish an aleph from a base. He did not know an aleph from a base. He didn't attend Cheder. Akiva ben Yosef, he knew nothing. And at 40 years old, he was a shepherd, he was out with his flock, and he sees drops of water from a rock that are falling onto another rock, and he notices the erosion, he notices the corrosion, and he says, if water can make an impression on this hard rock, then the Torah can still make an impression on me, despite the fact that I'm 40 years old. And he sat in a classroom with 5-year-old kids learning learning Aleph Base. That's what he did. It's extraordinary. And he went on to become the greatest sage of the oral tradition and one of the greatest sages of the Talmud. But yet his life is considered in some ways tragic. And we need to understand how we deal with setbacks, how we deal with tragedy. How do we deal with failure in our lives? You know, when we're younger, we think we're dream. You know, my kids tell us, life is going to be, when I get married, when I get older, it's going to be smooth. I'm going to have such an easy life. I'm not going to have any of these hardships. I don't want to have challenges. And that's the way we grow up in our formative years. And the truth is that from day one, life is not like that. Life is full of ordeals, tests, challenges, right? That is what life is all about, the trials and tribulations. From day one, a child is upset, comes out crying, and then is crying about the fact that it didn't get the milk at the right time in the right place. And then all of a sudden, The child soiled itself, the baby soils itself, and then is upset about that. And you think about it, a child, and we think he moves on from that, and he tries to walk, falls down, immediately cries about falling down. All the time throughout our lives, almost from day one, we are facing difficulties. That is what life is about. But no one embodied the indomitable spirit to be able to overcome challenges as Rabbi Akiva did. And let me share with you a couple of statements of our sages. We may go slightly over time. Chatati avisi prashati, please forgive me. I noticed Mervyn hasn't said good morning. Is Mervyn here this morning? Okay, I hope he is somewhere. Okay, but let me just share with you this idea. So firstly, there is a wonderful story in the Talmud, a couple of stories. Firstly, Rabbi Akiva had to deal with 24,000 of students, his life's work being killed, right? Being wiped out in this mysterious plague from on high. How did he deal with that? What was Rabbi Akiva's response? Anyone know what Rabbi Akiva's response was? Rabbi Akiva's response was he picked himself up, he straightened himself despite 24,000 students dying, and he had 5 students left. And with those 5 students, he moved forward. He started rebuilding. How could you not, how could you not be wallowing in self-pity, bemoaning your fate? You could just sit there mourning and crying for the rest of your life about what you've just experienced, about the ordeal you've just gone through, your beloved students all being wiped out. And what does that say about you as a teacher if the Almighty sends this plague, showing you clearly that something was fundamentally wrong in the way that you taught them or the way that they received the message? Second question. We know that Rabbi Akiva was walking, and Rabbi Akiva lived at the time of the destruction of the temple. The Romans were in control of Jerusalem and Israel, and he notices that there are foxes that are walking on the Temple Mount, right? Imagine, Har Habai is the place where the temple once stood. It's rubble. It's been destroyed by the Romans. They defiled it. They destroyed the temple. And not only that, but they see foxes that are walking amongst the ruins. And Rabbi Akiva is walking with some of his great contemporaries, and these contemporaries burst out crying, seeing the holiest place on earth, the Holy of Holies, where the high priest on the holiest day of the year on Yom Kippur would enter and speak to the Almighty and beg for our forgiveness. And now it's no more. That you've got lowly foxes that are walking everywhere. And they start to cry. And Rabbi Akiva laughs, and they ask him, why are you laughing? And he says to them, why are you crying? In other words, Rabbi Akiva couldn't understand why they were crying. And Rabbi Akiva's response was the exact opposite, polarized opposites to the same thing. Could not Rabbi Akiva relate to the destruction of the temple? Why was he laughing? We know that Rabbi Akiva's response was because he said to them afterwards, the same way that it speaks in the prophets that Jerusalem eventually will be destroyed, it says that foxes will even be walking on the Temple Mount. It also says that eventually the temple will be rebuilt. And if the prophecy of destruction has come to fruition, so too eventually the prophecy of the rebuilding and the eventual redemption will also come to fruition. Now, the other rabbis also knew about that prophecy. So why is it they were disconsolate? That's the question. These are the questions we want to deal with. And I want to skip through many hurdles, and therefore it may sound rather oversimplistic, but I think it's worth trying. We're going to be ambitious this morning. Rav Nachman of Breslov, he said that when we are dealing, there's one point that I missed. Another thing that you need to know in order for us to answer this question. Stay with it. I know it's a deep idea. So Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our greatest of leaders, wanted to see. He saw into the future, and he saw the Almighty. He saw in what God was doing when he was on Sinai, and he saw that God was sewing, as it were, crowns onto the letters. If ever you go into a Sefer Torah, you have a look, you'll see there's crowns on certain letters. It's not just decoration, there's a meaning. And Moshe didn't understand what the purpose, despite learning with the God, he didn't understand what the purpose of the crowns were. And the crown, says God, is for somebody called Rabbi Akiva, who eventually is going to be able to expound on all the crowns, the meaning and significance of all those crowns that are on the letters of the Sefer Torah. And Moshe said, can I see this, Rabbi Akiva? And he says, yeah, sure, I'll show you. And he saw, and this is, excuse me, I know it's morning. He saw that they were they were, after Rabbi Akiva was killed, he saw them that they'd tortured Rabbi Akiva, and Moshe turns to God, seeing that he's seen an image of Rabbi Akiva, this great leader, being tortured to death, and he says, "Is this his reward for somebody who immersed himself in Torah?" God says, "Be quiet." And the question is, what exactly is going on between Rabbi Akiva, between Moshe and God? Why does God tell him to be quiet? Why didn't God just say, you can't understand it, and that's it? And the answer to all these questions from Rabbi Nachman, he says there are two levels of questions that we have of faith. We all have questions. There are things that we can understand about, and there are things that we can't understand about. Things that we understand about, we can ask, and people can tell us. But there are things that are beyond our comprehension. And it's those moments, he says, that we need to remain silent. Not to go into those questions, but instead to raise our game and to be able to delve into trying to come closer to God, and through doing so, and as it were going over the wall that stands in front of us, we reach a higher level where the question no longer bothers us. Now that's a very deep idea, and I've thought about it overnight quite a bit, and I would suggest that we all think about it, and eventually hopefully the penny will drop. But the idea in short, there are certain things that in the place where we are, we cannot understand. And it's only when we try, as opposed to trying to spend our lives trying to understand the unthinkable, the incomprehensible, that we raise our level, and then it's not the question disappears, but the question no longer is gnawing away at us. That is what happened, and that's why Moshe was told to be quiet. God said to him, you don't even try to understand. A crown is something that is on the head. There are things which are beyond our wisdom, beyond our knowledge. It's beyond our heads, and that's what God was telling him. And Rabbi Akiva, as opposed to Moshe, was able to raise his game to transcend his comprehension, his ability, and therefore become a different person. Time and again, he reinvented himself so that what bothered him didn't bother him. The mysteries of the world, the struggles which he had, the existential questions about his students, about foxes on the high, all the troubling things of the questions of why do bad things happen to good people, Rabbi Akiva was able to raise his game and to not look into those questions. And I think that's the lesson for us of reinventing, recreating ourselves time and again, rather than just being stuck in a position of feeling that we are unable to move. We're in a state of paralysis because we've got one question or something that really bothers us. There are questions that gnaw away at all of us. I remember hold on 1 second, just 1 second. I was told to switch something off and I didn't. Anyways, in short, we find that there are questions that are all bothering us. I had a teacher, wonderful teacher. He was a madrich in Bnei Akiva, and wonderful guy. And he went off to Israel. And when he went off to Israel, he eventually found out. There was the terrible tragedy of Baruch Goldstein. Baruch Goldstein was an Israeli fundamentalist who went into the cave of Machpelah with a machine gun and machine gunned Arabs that were praying at the time. It was horrendous. I was in Israel at the time, and as a result of that, one of my madrichim, my leaders, he took off his couple. He left everything behind, and the reason why he felt that he didn't want to associate himself with faith, with religion anymore, was because of the questions. The question, he got stuck in the question. And what I am trying to share with you today is the great wisdom. It's a very, very deep idea, but it's the idea that if we just want to stick with a question, we are never going to move on. There are some questions which are simply incomprehensible, and we're not meant to be able to understand the infinite wisdom of God, being finite beings. But what we are meant to do is park that question, deepen our relationship and connection with God, and therefore the question eventually we will reach a place where that question doesn't bother us. That's my thoughts for today. We'll end with Haskara and Refuah Shalema and wishing everyone well, and then Kabbalat Shabbat at 4 p.m. with David Berman and Sammy. They're back today. So Adon Alamim Zacho Es Nishmais. Kol Shabbos Sheyal Chuli Lamam Bagan Eden Tei Menuchos Malachim Barachamim Yasu Mesei Kanaf Olamim Veyetzot Chaim Sushasam Night Nachlasam Yanuchu B'Shlam Mishkavam V'Nama Amen. Refuah Shlema Misha B'Achav Sein Romas Yaakov Moshe David Shlomo Yivat Rabbis Achelim Babu Shanim Bispalim Bavuram Bischazakash Baruch Yimalei Rachim Alehem Lachman Afosam Vishlach Lem V'Shlan Shmaim Lecholim B'Soch Shach Yisrael Refuah Sanefesh Refuah Sogov Hashavach Zmakarib V'Namar Amen. Think about the idea that we shared this morning. It's one of the most profound and deepest and most important ideas I think I've ever heard. The idea that there are things that are going to trouble us, that are going to gnaw away at us, that we are going to bother us tremendously. And if be it the way a person behaves, or be it something that happens in the world, and we can decide what type of life we want to lead. Do we want to be stuck in the question, or are we prepared to have the strength of character to say, I recognize my limitations and understanding in that regard, park that question, deepen my connection, transcend myself, go over the wall that's in front of us, and then that question will no longer bother us. It will still be there, but eventually we'll get the answer. Somebody once said, I think it was after the Holocaust, they said, somebody said, I've got many questions about the Holocaust. And one of the Rebbes who had been through the Holocaust says, yes, but I know that if the answers are not down here, the answers are upstairs, and I'd rather not be called to hear the answers yet. So I'd rather live with the question. We don't need to live with the question. We can park the questions that we have about all the things that trouble us in this world. We are not expected, and we'll never be able to truly fathom the Almighty's wisdom in this world. But what we are meant to do is keep moving forwards. And whenever we face ourselves with a brick wall, don't stand staring at the wall. Go over the wall, go around the wall, but raise our game and reinvent ourselves, recreate ourselves in the same way that Rabbi Akiva did. I'll see you at 4 p.m. Please God for the wonderful Kabbalat Shabbat. Wishing you all Shabbat Shalom. Have a great day and a great Shabbos.